the council prior to tonight. Can I have roll?
Yuba-Sutter.live's local government live streams are presented by Plumas Lake Self-Storage in Plumas Lake, where lifelong local residents are helping other residents keep things safe, providing indoor storage units, outdoor RV and vehicle parking, moving supplies, and Penske truck rentals. Details at plumaslakeselfstorage.com.
And talking to Mr. Bendorf, if the council has any immediate questions that has to be answered, we can ask them during, but we'd prefer to have the questions come after the presentation. And then once the presentation is done, we will have comments from the public, and then we'll bring it back to the council, starting with comments from the ad hoc committee and then further discussion from the council. So with that, Mr. Bendorf, you have the floor.
Mr. Mayor, council members, Robert Bendorf, interim city manager. Before I get started, I wanted to just take a brief few moments and say thank you to all of those folks that were involved in putting this together. From the budget ad hoc committee, which were obviously the mayor, Mr. Shaw, and Councilmember Pasquale, thanks for your time in meeting with us a few times actually as we discussed the recommendations moving forward. Hope you found the discussions with the department heads beneficial. And I really wanted to thank all the department heads. They really put together some good budgets that technically started many months prior to the workshops we had over the last month. And they did a tremendous job in making sure they stuck to what the council direction was, but also explore other options looking forward into the future. I wanted to certainly thank my staff for, well, we'll just call it putting up with me during the last, geez, what have I been here 8 weeks now, 7 weeks? So thanks for hanging out with me and taking good care of me too, because obviously jumping into budget season as the first thing you're doing is not, it's not easy, but especially when we have a few challenges to face. But as we'll explain throughout the presentation and then through questions and so forth, make sure that we talk about how we get to a good place in planning for the future for Yuba City. Last but not least, I really want to thank Deanna and for all of her hard work. I mean, we had a short window. I was going to ask her the other day hey, it's been about 7 weeks. Are you used to me yet? And I don't know if that can ever happen for somebody, but at least you're able to tolerate me a little bit better. So thank you for doing that, Deanna. And I know you have a lot on your plate right now, so I appreciate all your efforts, not only in working with difficult Robert, but all of the department heads and their requests and asks. So I just want to say thank you. So Mr. Mayor, without any further ado, get started. All right, here goes nothing. So this is what we're going to present tonight. Obviously a little different format than I think what the city council has seen in the past. And again, it's just kicking a few tires and see if if this is a good route to go. If you want to change, certainly we can change it and do it a little bit differently next time. But a little bit of background of where we've been, some projections, what our assumptions were going into this budget year. A little bit of by the numbers. You'll see the basics of the city budget, acknowledgement of current issue goals, and then budget recommendations, and have certainly our discussion. One of the things that you won't see tonight is you won't see departments presenting. They did that with the budget ad hoc committee, but certainly if your council has any questions, certainly direct them here or when we bring the full budget forward on the 17th. And we're excited to do that because, again, I think there was a lot of good approaches that were talked about with the departments, but you won't see a lot of those initially in this presentation. What you'll see a lot of is those approaches and how we figure out things as far as our operations and future revenues presented a little bit differently and at a little bit different time. So one of the things I wanted to mention, and I'll keep emphasizing this throughout the presentation, is you have a structural deficit. And I think you knew that in January, February, when you were meeting with department heads. But it's a pretty sizable structural deficit, and you started chipping away at that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through where have you been and where we are now. But I will tell you that in the approach that we had, you didn't get here overnight. You didn't arrive at this structural deficit. One morning you woke up and say, geez, we have a significant multi-million-dollar structural deficit. It happened over a period of time. And then when you combine other environmental factors, if you will, that are occurring within the nation or specifically within California, it adds to that. And then the usual cost of business increases, we can't ignore those. So all of that combined to say, hey, we're going on a little journey here, but we're going to remain future focused. And my job, even though I'm only your interim city manager, is to make sure that we develop a proper cadence on how to address this, that we're not just rushing to judgment and saying we have to cut immediately and we have to impact not only people's lives that work for the city, but our residents as well and the level of service that they get. So this is not done without any, great feelings. I mean, we want to be very sincere with our budget presentation, but at the same time, we want to be realists too. And if you try this overnight, in other words, get to a solution or a set of solutions overnight, I don't think we're going to like it very much. It'll be too rushed, and we need to make sure we, again, develop that proper cadence. So where have we been? So back in 23, 24, your council elected to use about $2.4 million of the reserves that were in existence there. This comes right from your budget book and from what you discussed in January with your department heads. And then in 24, 25, which is the current fiscal year that we're in, there was about a $5.5 million structural deficit. And again, it was a combination of one-time uses and expenditure increases and probably throw a few other things in there. But to sum it up, that's where we were in 24, 25. You budgeted about $4.2 million in reserves to make that budget balance. And you had a remaining deficit of about $1.3 million. So at that point, your departments were instructed to come up with some cost reduction scenarios and bring them to your council. And they did that. On February the 18th, your council had a meeting where you considered all of those presentations from your department heads and what their recommendations were. In other words, keep the heartbeat of the city still ticking, even though it may involve some reduced services, reduced personnel, those types of things. So those recommendations in summary, for the most part, included these items that you'll see here today. And again, I'm not going to read every one of them, council members, unless you'd like me to, but it was everything from reduced hours at City Hall to freezing of positions, cancel some sponsorships, went to review fees, of which that's already happened, by the way, and it's making a positive impact to the budget. And then all of the other things that are listed there, and you can see. Not easy decisions by your council, and not easy decisions for your department heads to recommend either. Your vacant positions, I mean, this is something really to be concerned with. And I think your council knows that. But then again, you had to make sure you made some course corrections mid-year, which hats off to you, or your projected structural deficit to be much higher. So your council took the appropriate action. Your department heads had some, I'm not going to say great recommendations, but they put forward to all of you some good, solid recommendations that would at least eat away at a little bit of the structural deficit. But again, I think I've used the word before with a few folks, it's just not really healthy. And it's not that it's not healthy with what's being proposed and the potential dollars that you're saving. What I mean by that is if you look at things in total or holistically, however you want to put it, I use the police department, for example. So over the last 10 years, it says in here, you've got, let me see, 4 positions held vacant. And then at any one time, Chief Runyon has 4 or 5 folks that are out because of injury. So you look at those numbers and then you go back 10 years. And it's important, I think, for the council to keep in mind that when you go back 10 years and you look at the number of sworn officers that Chief Runyon's had, I believe that number was 64 off the top of my head. And that was 10 years ago. Since then, you've had a significant increase in the number of new businesses, whether large or small, in the city of Yuba City, that go into their span of control, the police departments, and making sure they provide the necessary public safety. But you also have 5.5% increase in your population over the last 10 years. And today's number, instead of 64 sworn officers, now you have 65. One officer growth in about 10 years. And that's counting for the frozen vacancies too. We didn't include those in the number. So a net one. Over the last 10 years, you've had other speed bumps. And again, I'm not picking on public safety. I'm not trying to use the example of public safety and what they're going through, but I think it is symptomatic of all of your departments. They're doing less with less, but they're still providing a great service to our residents. And I caught that in all of our budget discussions with them, discussions with the ad hoc committee. Your department heads and all of your employees are digging very deep to make sure they come up with solutions. And it's not about just saving their jobs or making sure we save $1 here and there. But what I hear is they're very passionate about the services they provide to Yuba City residents. And that is front of mind for all of your department heads, not anyone excluded from that statement. So again, when you look at this, there's more to the story here. And while I don't have a slide that covers what was going on 10 years ago, we have a few slides that provide a little bit of history. And I think those are all things that we have to take into consideration, because not only that 10 years unfortunately provide for, that 10 years provide for maybe just static growth, like in your police department, but you've also had state mandates that come about, such as homelessness, and you have other things that require dollars to be spent on technology, from body cams, because 10 years ago, this didn't exist. And then somebody has to maintain all those recordings and a bunch of other items that go along with that. So when I say one officer increase, it's not really much, considering 10 years ago, you didn't have an officer assigned to homelessness. And that's a sworn badge-wearing, gun-toting police officer, but they're off on special assignment. And talking to Chief Runyon, there's several more of those as well, right, in the department. So things have changed significantly, but basically not keeping up with the growth. So sorry for that long-winded thing, but again, there's more to the story than just these are the positions that are left vacant. And you see that in other departments as well. So the projected cost savings that your city council took in February, the rough number that it came up to be about $2.34 million. And you can call it savings. I tend to go back and forth. I call it savings or cost avoidance. And you call it either. But it was about $2.34 million. So when you look at the structural deficit of where you started in 24, 25, or where it got to, then you look at your use of reserves, and then the reductions that you approved in February and that were implemented, to the good of about $1 million. Now you think, oh, geez, you know, we made some reductions, cuts, whatever you want to call them, and we came out $1 million to the good. However, right here, this number, that 4.8 number, 4.18 number, you used a lot of one-time money. So I'm glad you went over, because that helps things a little bit as far as the ongoing cost reductions. If you didn't do that, I'll tell you in a minute what would have happened or what it would look like instead of the number I'm going to present you soon. So that's your actions so far this year. And then if you look at the budget development, so we've been undergoing a very comprehensive review of revenue and expenditures, things related to debt issuance, pensions, any one-time funds we have. Again, this is just a small sampling of all of the things folks like Deanna and your departments are looking at to make sure that we can somehow come out of this a little bit better in 25, 26 and beyond. So we had the budget discussions with departments, and don't forget about the ad hoc committees. So the other assumptions that we went into, your revenues from property tax, the sales tax, TOT, franchise fees, your large categories of discretionary revenue that your council can spend anything on, or you can appropriate it anywhere you want. That's limited, and it's limited because those revenues are fairly static. The only one that you have increasing, and you'll see that in a little bit, to a decent clip, it's not great, is your property tax. All the other ones are really static. So Anyway, we also assume that we're not meeting the cost of doing business. Their prices are just going up too fast. You can name it, from workers' comp, pensions, health insurance, et cetera, regular insurance. You'll see some more of those as we move along. So we accounted for the employee merit adjustments, not salary increases, these are merit adjustments for employees, and strategically used one-time reserves. We knew we were going to have to once we got the basics of the budget, and that's where we're at. And then it goes back to the cost increases from utility costs. You had an item before your council, I think it was about a month ago, regarding the cost of chemicals. And I believe Ben or Ann, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that number was like $1.5 million just in chemicals for water, wastewater, GAP, et cetera. And it was a lot more than what we had planned on spending, if I remember correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong. The costs are just really, really shooting up high. Again, from when you're planning for your budget to what the actuals come out to be. So we also assume that some options to achieve a balanced budget can be implemented fairly quickly, but we know that we need some longer term approaches to those. We went in there with the assumption that leadership and employee turnover is occurring. We get that. And we want to minimize staffing changes and reductions. So why minimize staff reductions? Well, they're your most valuable asset. We're in the service industry, and your council has to keep that at the forefront, not just at council meetings, but in your day-to-day interactions with your constituents and also your departments. And if you decrease the number of people you have, I've been through that scenario too many times in my career, not only with agencies that I work for or agency that I work for, or been involved with counties, cities, or special districts that experience staff reductions. And the recovery time in staff reductions, while it does solve issues related to structural deficits and other operational concerns with there not being enough funding, here we are with your time that it takes to hire people, right? And it's not just here, it's everywhere. And the cost to retrain, you start adding up all those costs that you can quantify, and you start adding up those costs that you really can't qualify, but you got a pretty good idea what those are. And those costs are the ones that impact your workforce to a great degree. And everything from creativity and innovation, employee engagement, again, the ones that you can qualify when you have less people. People become overburdened, overworked, and they sort of lose that jazz, if you will, in working with our residents every day. I'm not going to say that that would definitely happen here, but it's been my experience. Anyway, that certainly is a big hit to your workforce. And there's some very somber approaches when these things happen. So then on the recruitment side, you come out with layoffs, and we're replacing positions now, rehiring now, but people are less inclined. Listen, the news is only one click away these days. They're going to see, if they're looking for jobs within local government, they're going to see that we're performing layoffs, even if we have open positions. They're going to think, how secure really is that? And should I apply or not? So by the numbers. This is what we estimated your projected deficit to be going into the 25-26 fiscal year. It was a little bit higher than this, but we recently made some a few corrections, but also we got our cost plan numbers finally, and we incorporated those. So it's a little bit less, not a lot, but about 700,000 less than what we initially projected. But again, like I mentioned before, your council, if you hadn't taken those actions in February, add $2.34 million to this. But you took the appropriate actions at the appropriate time and left it definitely a lot more manageable. But one thing you couldn't predict is all the cost increases coming up in 25, 26. We didn't know what those were yet. We do now, and they're not pleasant, but we know that we have to make up that one-time use. So how much do you have? So these are your one-time revenues that you have in the bank. Your city has done a very good job, and I think you've been very diligent with setting one-time revenues aside. Regardless of the purpose that you see here, they're funded appropriately. but they always run the risk of not being funded appropriately when you begin pulling from these one-time revenues. Not all of them are flexible. Like take for example, our vehicle replacement fund and what the amounts will be after once we enter 25, 26. You'll have about $9.4 million there. But again, this is to replace vehicles and vehicle-related type of equipment purchases that you have to have. A lot of them are for emergency vehicles, or they can be for your equipment vehicles that Public Works needs on a day-to-day basis. But your debt service obligations that you see that asterisk there, that 9.4, you have about 2.6 million in debt service. You got to have some money in there. And then when you're making debt service payments, you obviously have your debt ratio in there in order to keep your credit rating, keep interest rates from going on, depending on what your covenants are. You need to make sure that you have that backed up. So that total amount, that 25.7, doesn't give you necessarily what I would refer to as a piggy bank, but it's appropriate. Again, when Moody's or Standards & Poor's, whatever you want to do, if you ditch your one-time revenues to a significant degree, that will come up and impact your credit rating. And if you need to borrow money for whatever the purpose is in the city of Yuba City, it's going to negatively impact that. And you're one disaster away from using these types of things. And I hate using that D word, but we all know today's days and times that happens a lot more frequently than it has in the past. So having these there for your use is extremely important. So we're using some of them, but this is what's going to be there after or when your council is presented the 25-26 budget. So how are your revenues doing? I talked a few minutes ago about your key revenues, and we identified these 5 because they are your biggest discretionary revenues. Again, if all 5 council members decide, a majority of you decide, hey, you know, we're going to give it all to, let me see, we're just going to give it all to Ben's department, right? All 35, though there's more than this, but basically you're about $40 million, give or take. Nothing prevents your council from doing that. Now, you may have some maintenance of efforts and some requirements for small slivers of it, but this is your discretionary revenue that you can put wherever you want, whatever your council's priorities are. But if you see where the revenues have been over the last few years, you're not seeing much growth at all. You're seeing some minor changes. I talked earlier about property tax. That had some decent growth to it. Not as much as the year over year prior, but as you see there, it's a little bit more than what we had projected for 24-25. On your hotel motel tax, you know, pretty much we're projecting about 1.57. We're projecting about 1.6 million in the upcoming year. So again, these are the growth estimates and actuals of your biggest general fund discretionary revenue categories. And again, I look at one being sales tax, not a lot of growth there, and actually it's declined from 2 years ago significantly. And we can certainly get into those discussions a little bit later. So expenditures by department. So you have this revenue, this general fund revenue, but there's also other revenues as well. We're not going to leave water and wastewater out, but we're focused right now on the general fund piece. So look at police. So 37% down to 35%, and estimated to be about 35%. Public Works, 10%, 12%, 12%. Now that may have to do for grant funding for a project that's going on, whatever the case is, or some general fund requirement as a match, but it's not that much when we look at the big picture. So the picture that, well, I'll tell you this in a minute, but these are where your proposed budgets that were handed in by departments are landing. And when you look at this, community services and finance and police, all of your department heads and their respective staff that worked on these budgets are working very hard to come in with no increases the best they can. They've heard you loud and clear, and it's not without a little bit of pain when they're doing it, but I think they've been very creative and constructive with how they have presented their proposed budgets. So then you get into administration, development services, et cetera, and you see that equal sign at the total general fund expenditure side, roughly for proposed 25-26, about 62.1 million. Last year, 61.7. Not a lot of growth there in expenditures. And I think that paints a picture of responsibility by your department heads and the actions that your council has taken right around mid-year. Not easy to get to that number with only a slight increase, but you got there. So this is an interesting one. So I'm just going to take 3. This is your net city costs. So in other words, this is what the expenditures are. Non-general fund discretionary revenue, that's how much they're receiving. And that is the net city cost for these operations. So to put things in perspective, I'm going to flip back and forth between a couple of slides here. So take a look at I'm going to stand a little closer to the mic. I'm really sorry if you weren't able to hear me okay? I tend to shout a lot. Is that too loud? Is it all right? Okay. I'm not really shouting, am I? I hope not. Okay, good. So you have your net city cost by department. So I want you to take a look at police and fire. And I'll have, if we have an accountant in the room, you take your pick who wants to do it. But if you total up police for the net city cost column and fire, what does that come out to be? About, just round it up, about 37 million, give or take. Am I about right? Now add community services to that. What does that come out to be? Yeah, so about close to 41 million, right? That's how much net city costs. That's how much money they need to keep operating. Those 3 departments. What number did we have? What was it again? What was the total? 41 million. Now let's add up the sales tax, property tax, and your franchise fees. What's that total? A lot less than 41, right? It totals about 38 million, just rounding up. So add the other ones to that. There's 39 million, there's 40 million, and you finally get to 41. That just funds those 3 departments. So all of your discretionary revenue, I mean, that doesn't list them all. There are some smaller pots, but those are your main ones. But out of your 5 categorically principal discretionary revenue sources, you can fund your police department, your fire department, and community services. Public works, no more. Finance, IT, no more. Admin, development services, human resources, contingency, non-departmental, no more. Tough road, right? So again, not just an expenditure issue, but it's a revenue issue as well. So how do we balance that? How do we get to that structural deficiency that you've heard us refer to, that the ad hoc committee has heard us say probably way too many times to them? We do it with some one-time money and just a small smidge of ongoing. I do not like this approach. It's not my favorite. It isn't what I aspire to be as far as when I'm coordinating budgets and working with staff. But your city has done a really good job of making sure that money's been set aside for whatever the purpose may be. But it's not something that you can live on. I mean, heck, I love pizza, right? Can't live on it. If I ate it every day, I'd probably be pretty ill at the end of the day. If you use this approach, you'd be probably pretty ill at the end of the day. But for the time that we have to make sure that we move forward into 25, 26, making sure we maintain some type of level of service to our residents that's positive, that our employees can handle, that's what we need to do. At least that's my recommendation anyway, moving forward. is we balance it with some one-time money, and there'll be some other things that we put in place that you'll see in the slides after that. So again, going back to what remains in your one-time revenues, you still have about, I think the number is 25 million, correct me if I'm wrong, in your one-time revenue sources. You can reduce a little bit of that for what's able to be used for the most part, but you do have some one-time resources there. We just don't want to burn through that very quickly, right? So 1 million in general reserves, healthy cities. They have some law enforcement designated reserves there as well. That's what they total up a little bit larger than that, but not very much. And it's cops, there are 3 categories. Cops money, traffic money, and what was the last one? Stop money. So again, specific to law enforcement. Capital Improvement Fund, transfer $1 million out of there, and we'll talk about that a little bit further about capital projects moving forward. We have some remaining interest from the ARPA funding, putting that in there as well. So that's really not pulling down, your one-time monies for the most part that are sitting there in accounts. And then we have the 115 trust for PARs, and we also have, well, I'm going to talk about 115 trust for PARs. When you establish that trust, you all know that paying for pensions is tough. I mean, that amount seems to be going up. There'll be a slide that shows those cost increases. But for PARs, you can use that money that you've set aside, of which there's over $4 million in that bucket. And there'll be over 4 million remaining after we recommend, and if your council chooses to go with this recommendation, we're only taking 500,000 out of there to help pay for that pension obligation. And then we also have the OPEB obligation, which is other than pension benefits, which we can take a small out of. I think it's around 55,000 is what we can remove from that trust that your council established. And again, I don't, it's hard for me to say, as I stand here, use all your one-time money, you have it available to you, you stuck it away, why not use it? Why have savings accounts if you're not going to? But it affects so many things, and there's so many tentacles to this octopus that you can be in a position one day where they're so low that you can't make an obligation that you're required to make, or an emergency that you're trying to make sure you handle effectively. So that's our recommendation with the one-time monies. So why? So the capital improvement projects, we're not recommending any additional contribution in the upcoming year to capital projects. We're holding that. And I would say the recommendation would probably hold true for 26, 27 as well. And then proceed with currently approved projects, for example, the ones that are important to the city that keep things future focused, that they're not worried about yesterday, what happened yesterday or today, but things like your general plan update, which includes the rewrite of the zoning code, right? Which comes next after you've done your general plan update. That's just part of it, right? And then your citywide cleanup, that's in there as well. So there are other examples of the capital projects, but we're going to be doing a comprehensive review, and that we'll talk about that here in a few minutes as well. So pensions, what are pensions doing these days? Well, I don't think you have to really guess on where trend lines are going. The top represents your classic employees, and the bottom down here represents your PEPRA. Obviously, the PEPRA lines are a little bit flat, but you see your classic number is going up significantly. So not too cheap. So your blue line, I believe, is safety tier 3. Wait a minute. It's, I can't see, miscellaneous. And then the red up top is safety tier 1, and the green is safety tier 2. And then you can read for the PEPRA as it rolls down almost the same categories. So they're not getting cheaper. I'll just leave it at that. They don't cost less. That's even better. Enterprise funds. I told you we wouldn't forget about water and wastewater. Well, the numbers may not appear to equal here. There's a reason for that. Water and wastewater are in your enterprise funds, right? And so you can look at the expenses they have, the capital projects, and they're going to dwarf anything else that the city has. It's an expensive venture, especially when it comes to equipment, it comes to staff. I mean, they're doing things to make sure that water still flows to residents and people can still flush their toilets on the wastewater side. So an extremely critical operation, and it's not cheap, but it's not a product of the general fund. These are fees that are paid by users, whether they're commercial, industrial, residential. That's how it's supported here. So as you can tell with water, again, they're doing a great job in keeping their expenditures relatively flat. But it's hard, especially when you look at the capital projects. These aren't cheap pieces of equipment. These are ones that are changing their technology every day. And for some pieces of equipment, the last time we purchased them had been probably safe to say maybe a few years ago, if not maybe a little bit more for some pieces of equipment. Yeah, I'm getting a head nod. Yeah. So what you spend here, it's important to have money set aside within those enterprise funds for that, and making sure we achieve a debt ratio that's responsible. If you don't achieve a debt ratio that's responsible, like about 1.2, you run the risk of costing yourself a lot more money to the taxpayers, because your interest rates can go up, bondholders get a little bit scared, if you will. And if you go out to do some other type of credit venture, it's going to impact you negatively. And I have seen when people haven't met their debt ratio, and it's like pulling the fire alarm, and it sets off all kinds of things, because somebody will find out. You can't hide it. So the same with wastewater. So again, you look at the capital expenditures, a little less on the wastewater side, but a little bit more on the expenditure side for wastewater, for total expenditures. And that really comes about when you're looking at a little bit on the, well, I would say your operational is where that's coming from. But your debt ratio still looks decent, even though it's down a little bit. So if you want further explanations of everything that's happening with water and wastewater, I am confident that the folks here can explain that. But for the most part, I will admit to you that I think that operation is doing okay, but they need to make sure that they have funding for those capital projects. But our focus this year was really on the general fund. Not that we didn't pay attention to water and wastewater. They have the fees coming in, they're replacing equipment as they go. They have their staff working there that are just doing an incredible job for the numbers they have, and making sure residents get the service. Those are your personnel FTEs. So roughly about 331, then you add another 7 that for elected part-time. When I ran these numbers, so your personnel numbers, they were about 337, I think, last year or something like that. So it's maintained, it's relatively static. We're not asking for any increases. Your departments aren't. We're just making do with what we have here. That's not to mention there's a lot of frozen positions as well. So this next piece that I want to talk about is council acknowledgements. I am not trying to put the council on the spot. It's not my intent. But it's important for us that are putting together the budget documents, the paths forward, the recommendations, working with the ad hoc committee and your departments, that the council acknowledge these issues that we have. Without that acknowledgement, it makes us hard to know what buckets to focus on or what areas to concentrate on, et cetera. So these are things that you'll see when we present the full budget here soon. So we want the council to acknowledge the following, and I am going to read these. Overcoming the structural deficit, it's a multi-year effort. Fiscal transparency is key. And specific priorities, citywide priorities and associated action items should be developed as soon as possible. I think you have some great general approaches and you have your focus areas, but I think in talking specifically about priorities, we need to drill down a little bit more for the benefit of your departments, all your staff, and for the council when you're making critical decisions in the upcoming year. And ultimately, priorities guide your choices. Specific priorities guide your choices. Also, the council will acknowledge some deficit reduction options can be implemented quickly, which is good. Others are longer term. Recommended increases in expenditures will have an expenditure reduction elsewhere. What do I mean by this? And it's really simple. I don't, I'm not lobbing a hot potato into your side of the court or anything. But my ask is fairly simple. If your council directs staff to say, hey, add 60,000 to Chief Runyon's budget and add 30,000 to Ann's budget, that's great. That's your council's prerogative to do that. You set the policy. My only follow-up question is, where do you want me to cut from? Do you want to add money to this budget, knowing your structural deficit, just tell me where to cut. But if you want to increase that deficit, that's certainly up to you too. That's your policy decision to do that. So that's what's meant by that second bullet. But a majority, as you've all seen, I've gotten clipping service articles from you folks, the ones that I get in my email, and most local governments are experiencing deficits of some sort due to rising costs in doing businesses, the recovery from COVID, call it whatever you wish, but it is rampant. And some cities are shutting down significant operations within their day-to-day operations, as well as counties and some special districts as well. So what about 25, 26? And we want to make sure that, well, this doesn't lay out everything that'll happen in the upcoming year. We certainly would ask that the council acknowledge the following: that 25, 26 will be a planning and implementation year for budget and operational service level recovery, be a year involving difficult policy decisions, because that is coming up to a theater near you next year. Have staff evaluating many aspects of our city government for efficiencies and effectiveness, and that we work to eliminate and minimize the structural deficit. Objectives that we want to accomplish: overcome our challenges and think a little bit different. We just need to. And whether that's through service redesign that we'll talk about, whatever, but we need to think very strategically. I'm not saying your departments and the city council hasn't done that, but we really need to put it in high gear for this next year and even beyond. The objectives provide certainty for our workforce and residents. And then official and operation and recovery is needed soon. The big one there, I would tell you, diligent. We need to be very diligent about what we do and not make sort of, that no surprise rule, right? All of a sudden we throw something out of left field that throws departments into chaos, or even your city council into chaos for that matter. If there's ever a time when all five of you, which you do a very good job in just my short time of hanging out with you, I think you do a very good job of understanding the greater good. And the greater good is making sure the city focuses on its services and to its residents, but you don't do it with a lot of drama. And you don't do that. You don't do that with you don't have a lot of drama in your council chambers. And so the focus is good. I'm just saying we need to be diligent like you have been doing, but we can't waste a lot of time either debating back and forth about little things. We need to focus on the big picture future. Other objectives, we need to leverage our assets that we have. And you can talk about assets in the form of employees. You can talk about assets in the form of what we own, land, what we have in one-time funding, et cetera, but we need to leverage those in a smart way. If there's a $5 million grant for some road improvements through SACOG or whatever, we need to make sure we have some of that one-time money that's available that you saw a glimpse of earlier to make sure, yep, what a great investment. Let's leverage some of that one-time money we have for those types of projects. Re-engineer and streamline processes, explore new sources of revenue, evaluate what our current ones are, definitely be innovative. We don't have a choice. And I think most local governments don't have a choice right now. We need to be innovative. And then institute quarterly budget reviews and mid-year adjustments to city council. Make it part of your regular practice that every quarter we come into you. You're not going to get volumes of information. That isn't the way quarterly reviews should occur. A little bit more detail at mid-year, especially if you're making adjustments. But the quarterly reviews are really your, hey, how are we doing on these revenues? How did Q1 stack up to Q1 the previous year? Have we experienced anything that is a direct result of the federal government or the state government imposing some type of mandate or reduction in funding of some sort, right? So those are all things that we'll be talking about when we do quarterly reviews and the mid-year review. So all of this information, we gathered it up, we put the ad hoc committee to work, and they had a lot to consider, especially meeting with all the departments and also discussing the latest and greatest from Dion and I. So here's what came out of that ad hoc committee. Some may say that, oh, geez, it's not specific enough. But I think your department's laid out the specifics. We refined the specifics a little bit, but these are all things that focus on the future. So I wish I could be specific with you today and tell you, hey, A, B, and C will work if we implement them. I would be wrong and sadly mistaken. We need to do our due diligence on these things, come to you with actual numbers and say, hey, this is going to make an impact in the current fiscal year and in future years. So we consider cost savings or avoidance measures, implement those quarterly reviews. I can't emphasize enough. That's why it's mentioned twice. We evaluate all large ticket expenditure items, and that includes debt, our pensions, one-time capital projects. There are some capital projects that are in your budget that have been sitting around for a few years. Let's make a determination. Do we stick with those? Or is it something we pivot to and look at other priorities the council may have? Explore and evaluate service redesign options. People say, well, what's the service redesign option? That is alternatives or options that you look at that make you more effective and efficient. Whether it's maybe combining some services or it is thinking of a new way to deliver. Maybe the service redesign is more focused on technology than it is, paper or hands-on. So those are options as well. And then, of course, review revenue enhancement options. And you all know what that means. It means everything from fees to our revenues that come in, such as sales tax, et cetera. How do we move the needle there? Other recommendations, 50% reduction in contributions for community sponsorships and events. Just can't continue to fund those. Eliminate funding for the Film Commission. We got that request come in. It was about $12,500. We reduced that. Again, our review, I don't want to point the finger, but I will tell you what I see or have seen there and talk to them about. There wasn't a lot of attention paid to the website, and they said, hey, we'll do your website. It still had the prior Chamber of Commerce director in their video. And they said they would, with the new funding for 25, 26, they would update all of that. Well, I appreciate that, but that person's been gone for a couple, 3 years. So I'm wondering what's happened in the interim with the funding that's being provided. So far be it from me. Hard hiring freeze. I mean, could we get a little softer with this? Sure. Would I recommend it? No. But July 1st, 2025 recommendation, police officer and firefighter positions, okay. Those frontline public safety, but other positions require the city manager and city council approval. So if a department wants to move forward with a position, not like it's an automatic no, but the justification certainly needs to be there. Starts off with the conversation with me, and then we can go to the city council, but that's done for a particular reason. There are so many priorities that you all have as a council, but there are priorities that your dedicated staff have too, and your leadership team have. And we can't just do one-offs. We have to think about things in the bigger picture. That's why I certainly need council's assistance on this type of approach. Recommendations, again, during Q1, we'll evaluate all operations receiving general fund discretionary revenue, provide a report to council of what that actually is in a little bit more in depth than what's in our workshop. And we'll have those discussions. And then we develop and evaluate cost reduction measures identified during Q1. And that could be a combination of what we talked about earlier for consideration and implementation by your council. So next steps, Certainly like some council input and discussion. We'll incorporate changes as necessary for that June 17th budget item that'll appear before your council. And that's when we'll present it, basically. And now time for discussion, and I'll stop talking, which I'm sure you are a big fan of. And we're more than happy to answer any questions that you have. And obviously you have a slate of department heads here as well. But Mr. Mayor, thank you. Council members, thank you. Take it from here.
Thank you, Mr. Bendorf. Thank you, Deanna. I know you guys have got hours and hours and hours input into this. Tonight's a little bit different than how we approached the budget in years past. So the first thing we're going to do is open up for any comments from the public. If there's anybody from the public that would like to say anything, make any comments, not Q&A, but comments. Okay. Not seeing everyone jump all at once. We're going to move it back then and close public comment and move it back to the council for discussion. And I think it's probably the best place to start is with some insight from the ad hoc committee as we went through this process. And we've been living this for a few weeks, have we not, Mike? And if you'd like to go ahead, sir, I'll open the floor to you for any comments that you have.
Thank you, Mayor. I know the focus for the last several years has been on expenses. I mean, you've got that down. All departments have got that down to a science. I don't question any of the expenses. You've cut it to the bone. I think that the discussion David and I had, the mayor and I had with all of you, was focusing on there's two sides to a budget. There's the revenue side and the expense side. And I think the revenue side is something that we need to be looking at really close. Wherever we can generate income, we need to do it. I think we've kind of left that off the table for several years now. And I think that focus needs to be brought to the forefront at this point. That's the one major thing, being one of your ad hoc committee members, that I saw that I think needs to be focused on in the future. So that was my main point.
All righty, thank you. To the council, I mean, this has been an interesting budget workshop and an interesting budget ad hoc year. I will say that, because we want to go in there, we want to fix everything, but I can tell you now, there is not a single magic bullet, as you would call it, that would fix this. As Robert said, and Robert, thank you for kind of bringing it through. I mean, this has been something that's been building for years. Many parts of this go back before any of us were ever sitting at the dais. And I do want to say, you know, we've done a lot of great things. You know, 6 years ago, Mark, when you and I came on and we started focusing on the expenditures, we've done a hell of a job on that guy. The expenditures are the expenditures. And we've almost got to the point with the expenditure side that if we're not careful, we're going to start stepping over dollars to pick up pennies, because the expenditures are the expenditures. And really the next place that you start having to cut to make things work from that aspect is our greatest asset, which is our personnel. Something that was very, very important to Mike and I as we went through the budget ad hoc. You know, Robert, you touched on it as our city manager. We need to carry as many of the 300 plus employees through this with us, because if, you know, for multiple reasons, but you look at the financial reasons, it's going to cost us so much more money on the backside of this to be a training ground. And we're going to lose an institutional knowledge, and we're going to be in a position of difficult recruitments and everything else. And we need to avoid that. I turn on the news every day like everyone does. I know Mark and I get those things from whatever that agency that gives, that's at Public CEO. Every day you see it. Director of this has resigned, city managers resigned, they're applying for this and they're applying for that. The list goes on and on. Sacramento is talking about laying off hundreds and hundreds of people. LA was, I think, 1,600 people or something of that nature. We don't want to become that. We actually want to take care of our greatest asset. And so we kind of went through that. you know, when you, hindsight's 2020, and when we start looking at things, you know, I've been doing finance and accounting for 35 years. I didn't realize what I said in January was actually where we were going to end up. I guess it just kind of came out for all those years, but the future is not going to look the same for our employees. It's going to look different, and it may mean that yesterday they were working for PD, and tomorrow now they're working over in fire because we had room here and didn't have, you know, we needed help over here, stuff like that. Things are going to be a little different. But when we look at things, we've made all of those adjustments that we've needed to do. We've saved almost 2.4 million, and we have to start looking forward. You know, back in January, actually December, I just felt the need that we needed to have an ad hoc committee with one of the focuses was a rev measure because we know we need it. But it quickly shifted in January going, we got to look at all revenue. And through the ad hoc process, we've identified various things that are already working their way through. And as we get done with this, we'll either go through the revenue ad hoc or straight through the city manager and the departments. But it's got to be forward looking, because I think the expenditure side is really there, because I don't know anywhere else we can really start taking things away to where it's going to make a meaningful impact. You know, I just want to say from our perspective as budget ad hoc, and I think, Mike, we both feel this way, this is a time for us to lead as a council through this, carry our 300 plus members with us through this, and really start looking at where we're going to be, not just in 12 months, because we've seen this before, but where we're going to be in a few years. Our biggest thing is we did not want to be like what happened around 2000, around 2008, and I think around 2015. That approach is not the smart business approach. And I think that's what we're hoping to bring differently here is let's look at this as the next year as a budget. The budget's a guide. We need to rely upon our E-team. You know, we looked at what you guys brought in, and you guys really cut and did what you needed to do. What Robert was hitting at earlier about adding revenue or adding expense and cutting somewhere else, go back to Ronald Reagan, zero budget accounting. That's exactly what you're talking about. And so I think we need to trust our department heads in that. You've got your own department, and if you need $100,000 for something, find it in your own department to cut $100,000 from somewhere else. It makes our job really easy, and I guarantee you we'll bless it because you figured it out and it's zero budget. But that's really the big takeaways. We need to stay looking forward, and we will come out of this. So that's all I have to say. So what comments or questions do you guys have as fellow council members? Yes, sir.
One more time. The example that we had in the budget ad hoc is that if you take out the fire and the police, you've got about 100 employees. If you eliminate all 100 employees, I think that's what Robert was kind of referring to, you know, if you get that $41 million and these three departments are going to be, we're still not going to make it. So that's not even in the way where our thinking is going. We know that is ridiculous, that not going to happen because it would just be a catastrophe at the best. So that brought it really into perspective for me of where we need to be going looking forward. And so, yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. Thank you. Yes.
Yes, sir.
You bring up a good point, Councilmember Pasquale, that I didn't bring up during the presentation. And it was just a simple exercise, right? 337 employees roughly. You take away utilities, they are self-funded through user fees, et cetera. So set that enterprise fund off to the side. Leaves you with about 261, you're right. You take away that 161 that are in police and fire, which are critical to have, as well as the other city services. But take those frontline public safety folks aside. It leaves you with 100 employees. And we ran through scenarios where we looked at the average salary and benefits for all employees in that category, that 100. if you were to lay all of them off, you barely cover. I mean, you cover with some extra, but it's not very much of what your structural deficit is. So in other words, nobody in IT to help repair a modem that's broken in a police car, nobody in HR to accomplish those human resource related items that we've all, grown accustomed to lean on HR about. No one to cut paychecks. The list goes on and on. But it basically wipes out all the departments, except for a few people within that number. So it's a little sobering to think of. So when you think, okay, this is an option, that's sort of that nuclear option, if you will. You don't want to go there. You can't practically. So there's got to be some middle ground to meet. And so, but we need time to think about that and make sure we're focused on the future, not making hasty decisions that will impact our employees' livelihoods and also the services to our residents.
To the council, anybody got comments or questions?
What's left of the presentation? I've got a whole sheet of comments, but I don't want to talk about stuff that's going to be presented. So I'm a little confused on that, if you don't mind. Okay. All right, through the mayor.
Yes, sir.
First, want to give my deep felt thanks to you, Robert, Deanna, the Budget Ad Hoc Committee, and the department heads for working through the budget. I've had the opportunity to sit on that Budget Ad Hoc Committee. It's not always pleasurable work, but it's very, very meaningful, and it has a lot of consequences. And I would echo the thoughts and statements some have made about we would probably be in a heck of a lot worse place today if we hadn't had, the good work of staff, department heads, and council members in the past, at least for the last 6 years, trimming. And Mike, you were very spot on in regards to a focus on expenses. And I think that we were drilling in on expenses because, when we came on, there was a push for a revenue measure in 2018, 2019, and there was sort of a heck no, we're not going to go in that direction until we know that the expenditure side of the budget is set. And I think through everyone sitting up here, we have done that. And it sounds like you guys have validated that with your work this year. And I think Robert, as a new set of eyeballs coming in, has seen that as well. So with that being said, I've always used the Budget Ad Hoc, either when I was on it or when I wasn't, as sort of the foundation, and then take a look myself. Fortunately, unfortunately, have about 14 years of budget experience, probably more than that with Penimation. So I'm looking forward to seeing your work and seeing what you all did with the budgets. I do feel like as a council person, I do want to see what you guys have recommended. And I'm sure that more often than not, if not all, I would agree with those. But I do think it would be important for us. So I'm making a request. I'd love to see when it's available, the departmental budgets. I do realize that at this point, some of the cuts that may be suggested might be viewed as de minimis. But at the same time, collectively, those end up being meaningful, especially when you're talking about skinny levels that we're talking about here. And I look forward to having, a good discussion about some of those. I think that when we get into, and I was really pleased to see things, I'm not pleased, that's not the right word. I think it was valid to take a look at things like the Film Commission and really at a time when we're trying to figure out what actually needs to happen versus what a want would be, that you all came up with those. And I have a feeling there's probably a few more, and we may or may not agree on those. But I do think that when we get into things like that, I hope we can have good discussion about that. I'm concerned about lazy assets. And I think that we do have some of those, and I'm hopeful that we can continue to explore those and see if it's worth doing something with those. We'll get into those details, I'm imagining, when we get into the more of the detail of the budget. I do want to echo the fact that So in 2008, 2009, I was still here as a fire chief and dealing with the beginnings of what was then the Great Recession. I left city service after that, went into the private sector and dealt with an ag economy that was up and down. And so that the budget that I was dealing with was about 95 million at the time that I left that. And that was a combination of challenges during that time of the ag industry, but also was on the council when COVID hit. And I want to applaud again the staff, many of you were here then, that we went through COVID with a ton of uncertainty and not knowing anything about what was going to happen, and had similar apprehensions about what was going to happen with the budget. We had that in both the public sectors and the private sector. So, you know, this isn't the time for me anyway to pull the alarm and go, oh my God, what's going on? It's the time to actually roll up the sleeves, take a hard look at where we can continue and keep our assets, especially those folks that work for the city of Yuba City, who I have a tremendous amount of confidence in, because they have been problem solvers, and they have, a lot of you have lived through some of this just like I did in the past. I'm going to challenge a little bit here in regards to the reserves. And I brought this up once before. I know that there are certain reserve levels, you know, the healthy fund reserve, et cetera, that we have been a party to as a city for some time. Through my affiliation with SACOG, there are different reserve calculations that could be considered. I'm not looking to try to make sure that we don't have money, but at the same time, I want to make sure that the reserves are appropriate. And SACOG went through this, and you know, I think it's an exercise as time permits, and probably a little bit of money, to take a look at that and say, what would be an appropriate reserve? Is the 15% Healthy Cities Reserve too high? Is it too low? I don't know. Someone just said, hey, look, we're going to do 15% reserve. You know, maybe that's where it needs to be. But at the same time, if we're putting money away, and each year we just put the money away, which isn't a bad thing, by the way, but if that's the case, it becomes a lazy asset. And, you know, maybe that could be used for something that actually increases revenue. So it's just a budget question I have. As Robert mentioned, many cities, and this isn't an excuse, many cities, I've done a lot of research over the last 3 or 4 months. Even those that had passed revenue measures are on skinny ice right now. They are, you know, we are absolutely not out here alone. And with that, the good thing about that is there's collective ability to look at what others are doing to address their budget challenges. And there's some pretty innovative stuff going on out there. And I'm encouraged as time goes on to take a deeper dive into what some of those and whether they have any utility. I am encouraged also, thank you to the Budget Ad Hoc Committee and staff and the budget preparation folks on the CIP. For many years, we look at the CIP and there's, okay, well, there's 100,000, and are we ever going to do that project? Or are we just putting money aside for a nice to have? We have a legitimate issue with funding essential services right now, okay? And I'm not discounting any of our services now, not as being essential. We've determined if we're providing them that they are essential. There are some that are more essential than others, but once again, I think this is something that we really need to take a look at. It looked like we had $1 million we pulled out of CIP. Is that correct? I'd be interested to see if there's even more. I mean, there's interchanges that we've had money for, libraries that we've had money, you know, things just aren't, you don't want to lose the project, but at the same time, are you ever going to execute on it? So I'd rather dip into those than get into losing valuable, trained people. I, for one, when it's been budget times, hard budget times, I appreciate quarterly reviews. I'm hoping that there might be an appetite for monthly reviews just to see how things are going. I will do it myself, come in, and I'm not asking for any burden. I think quarterly is fine, but at this particular point in time, looking ahead without a large windfall coming in, we're going to have to be pretty nimble, and we may need to make some further decisions down the road. So I think that is something that I'm going to go ahead and throw out there. I'm winding down here. I do think that we have to be careful about, our debt ratios for bonding, et cetera. So when we start looking at that stuff, I'm going to be relying on you, Deanna, and others in your department to make sure that we're not putting ourselves in jeopardy in regards to not being able to go, borrow, or if we get out there and have to get something that we're at the wrong side of that. I do think there are some things in regards to, Council Member Kirchner and I are on the Revenue Committee. I do think there's some things that are coming up that, we're going to have to take a hard look at. And some of those, are going to be looked at. It's already been that way. Hey, you're just doing this because you want people to vote. If we're doing something that affects people, it needs to be because it is valid and meaningful cut. It just doesn't need to be done just because we're trying to paint a picture of something so that somebody sees the need. We need to do a very good job of articulating what has just been put up here in regards to why the city is in its position. I don't know, this one shocked me, but it probably shouldn't have. 121% increase in utility costs since 2014 PG&E. 121%. If you don't think that affects the city of Yuba City and all its operations across the board, there's one you can tell people. Gas prices or fuel, there's plenty of stuff there. I'm interested in looking more into the TOT. I don't know what you guys did as far as the tourism stuff. I don't know what we're obligated to the tourism stuff, but boy, there's another one that, like the Film Commission, you go to their website and there's nothing there, so why are we giving away our TOT, transit occupancy tax? Why are we giving that away to a tourism effort that is not it's not returning on its investment? I would just see us holding on to that. And my goodness, that's a lot. Once again, thanks guys, to you too. I look forward to working with all 5 of us and staff as we continue to challenge this. It is going to be an interesting rest of this year and an interesting 25, 26, and then preparation for 26, 27. So I don't think I left anything out. If I did, I'll circle back.
Great. All right. Councilmember Kirchner, you got anything?
Yeah, through the mayor. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge and thank staff for all their hard work that went into and the ad hoc as well, all the work that went into this. Mr. Bindorf, you mentioned, and you actually used the word leverage, one-time monies. I would be interested to know, this is several years ago, through SACOG, the city of Yuba City was awarded $4 million specifically for Walton Avenue. And also there was some monies that were awarded for Garden Highway. Where are we with that?
It's my understanding that in the upcoming year, the bids should be released. And Ben, if you want to come up here, we're there. But I asked that question not too long ago, and I believe it's coming within the next year and a half, I believe. But Ben?
Never fast enough. I mean, first, just to talk buckets of money, SACOG, the road funds, they go into the CIP, they're grant funding, and the leverage is with road funds, with TDA funds. And so they're itemized in the CIP as grant funding, and then we leverage that match with available gas and TDA funds, not general fund dollars when we talk about that bucket. Are those important? Yes. Delivery of them is important because the time value of money, it just gets more expensive, more expensive. My understanding right now is we're wrapping up the authorization, basically the paperwork side of the business with the plans are pretty much almost done. We're entering the right of way, looking at a couple spots close to Lincoln Road in front of that store and then a Cherry and what we're doing. And we're anticipating putting out the bid. The funding that came through, even though everybody gets excited about being allocated that funding, it's actually programmed for next fiscal year. We could try to bring that forward because a lot of times projects don't deliver and then they say, hey, if you're ready, we'll bring that money forward. But technically the money is programmed for fiscal year 26. And I think Garden Highway is what, 28? 27. And so staff's diligently working on it. If we get it done sooner, we could bring that forward and try to move it faster, but that's where it's programmed.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Thank you. Chief?
And that's where it's key on the leveraging with the
Right.
road funds. And because we got to have some of that matching funds so we could go after those grants and be successful with them.
Chief, I got one for you. Thank you. Thank you, Ben. It's good to see you, sir.
The same to you.
Back at the workshop back in February, when staff was asked to do a 5 to 10% reduction scenario, one of the things that popped up was the potential or possibility of a fire station closure. The way I interpreted that was maybe it was incorrect. It was that could possibly be a cost saving measure. But now I hear it's possibly not. Can you walk me through that?
So during that specific proposal, there was a 10% reduction, what was proposed to the department. For us to get to that 10%, which was 1.6 million, I needed to do a combination of three things. One, hold the fire marshal position vacant. Two, remove the fourth person from the ladder truck to backfill overtime. And then three was to temporarily close a fire station to use those personnel to backfill overtime to reduce that cost of overtime. We're currently under a SAFER grant, which does not allow us to drop below 51 personnel operational. So we have to maintain 51 personnel. So the intent behind it was to reduce our overtime cost by filling vacancies, workers' comp, and sick leave.
So what you're saying is by simply closing a fire station, you're not going to save money. Is that what you're saying?
If you are backfilling behind those vacant positions on a daily basis, you do save money on regards to that. Now, if you get to a point where you're not under a SAFER grant requirement, you are able to leave unfilled positions and reduce your daily staffing. In both situations, you're reducing your daily minimum staffing.
Okay.
But it is a cost savings.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. Boy, Mark hit a lot of good stuff. The lazy assets, because I was thinking the same thing. We have at least one property that's being held up by a separate agency. That if we could somehow figure out a way around that, it would help out with this the $6 million. And to Mark's point, even if you have a revenue measure in place, it's not the silver bullet. Sac City. Measure U was a half cent, and there's still 44 million in the hole. So yeah, but that's all I have at the moment, Mr. Mayor.
All righty, thank you. Ms. Cole, do you have anything this evening?
I don't know what I can say that's already been said, but thank you, Deanna, Robert, Ad hoc. I'm sure as the years go on, I will have more to add, but I humbly recognize that just as the new citizen up here, I'm still learning myself, and I'm really grateful to the staff for being the experts on this. I think that you make our job a lot less challenging when you can be trusted to crunch those numbers and come up with some pretty impressive ones, considering the pressure and mandates coming from the state and, you know, just the rising cost of everything. I am looking at everything that's been presented really carefully, considering I will be up here the next 4 years. I think that pooling money from various places isn't necessarily sustainable, but I'm glad that we have been responsible for all of these years. And so I think my responsibility as a person representing Yuba City and my district is just to continue to be responsible. And I agree with the others. I really feel like you've said a lot of what I've already been thinking. And definitely the big one is our personnel. I think if we start to cut that, it's a negative impact on the economy at large in the city. And it's not good energy. So I'm glad that we all agree on that. And I think sometimes we're called to be visionaries and the creative minds behind decisions, but sometimes we're called just to be the compass or another set of eyes on projects and things. And I think my role here is really just to listen and be that set of eyes. So I'm just really grateful that we saw what we saw tonight, and that's something I feel like I can work with. So that's all for now. Thanks.
Squally, do you have anything else?
Mayor, Mark, your comment about the monthly budget, having been in another capacity as an elected, we did do that and it was very, and I am right. It was a standing ad hoc at that level. And it was very beneficial, Mark, and you're spot on with bringing that up. Yeah, quarterly's great. And we would bring it, the ad hoc would bring it, but yeah, having a monthly review of what's actually going on, I think is so important. Yeah, I did that for 35 years of my own business and my wife's business, and you have to keep your finger on it. So thank you for bringing that up. I totally overlooked that. So I highly recommend that we do that, Mayor.
Any other comments before I say mine? You guys have really hit the nail on the head across the board with where we're at. I've already heard some of the words come up that came up in the ad hoc and came up with when myself and the city manager has been in discussion. And one of the main words is nimble. And Mark, you mentioned that. This is going to be a year that this council and the city has to be more nimble than it has ever been in the past. And we've already been nimble, but we're just going to have to keep flexing in that capacity, because this is going to be a year that is very collaborative. Going back to the history of the city, going back to the 6 years that we've been on here thus far, it's been kind of set the budget, move on. We look at it when year end comes and do the next budget. It's really going to be collaborative. And what do I mean by that? When you guys see the numbers that come forward, when Deanna has the final numbers all together for us, really, we took and accepted the recommendations of our department heads, because they had already just spent hours upon hours upon hours. And I know that I asked myself, Miss Langley before she departed, a number that I wanted to know. And it wasn't because we were trying to get there from a budget standpoint, but the number I wanted to know is, what is that minimum manning number that we can't function below, if we, have to, start looking at things. It wasn't so that we could use that as a guideline. It was so that we could use that as a bright yellow line, that we can't cross that, because when we do certain things, you reach that point of no return. And so with that, there's going to have to be an incredibly large amount of trust between our city manager, our executive team, and the council for us to navigate this next year. It's going to truly be collaborative. So that's where I go back to where we talked earlier with the zero-based accounting, back to the Reagan years. That's where I'm going to trust if you guys come up and go, hey, we don't need this over here, but we need this over here. You guys handle the operational stuff day in and day out. We handle the policy stuff. And so we're going to have to work very closely together this year as a group and not run in silos. And I use that word very strategically, because I've seen it in 6 years to where, not meant maliciously by any means, we're just all taking a lot of pride in doing our job and getting it done. We're seeing PD work, we're seeing bridges and roads. I love Bridge Street and I love the new bridge. So, we're seeing all these things go together, and it's good accomplishments. But we're going to have to work so closely together. And that's what successful businesses do outside of government, is their leadership comes together and they work very collaboratively. They keep their eye on the ball, which is ahead of us. And that's what we're going to have to do. And Mr. Bindorf, got a question for you. And it's kind of redundant because you and I have talked about this here and there, but this is much larger than how we're going to be in 12 months or 24 months. If we do the right things and continue to do the right things and together work as a cohesive unit with that trust, where can we be possibly in 5 to 10 years?
So through the mayor, I honestly feel that, you know, being very familiar with Yuba City and certainly as a local government organization, where it positioned itself or where it was in the last, you know, decade and a half, maybe 20 years. The tough times hit everybody, but I think we can achieve that level of this being the premier place to work, this being the premier place to get, you know, your families to move to, your relatives to move to, and Yuba City takes a different spot on that map, but a much more elevated one. And I think you can get there. In fact, I know you can get there. And I will tell you, Mr. Mayor, I I struggle with my delivery here to the council, but let me preface it with this, that I recognize that all 5 of you are the policy setters for this city. And you do the right things. You wouldn't be sitting here today. You wouldn't have the services that are provided every day without your leadership there. Be very clear about that. But I think what sparks a good relationship between staff or your executives and the city council is debate. And I will tell you, as I stand here today, so here's the difficult thing to say, is I agree with a lot of what was said here tonight by the council, but I also disagree with a lot of it as well. And you don't want me, and I don't think you want your city manager to be a yes person. I think the one that's doing the day-to-day work, along with your executive team, et cetera, there needs to be some disagreement there. And I'm not going to pick items that I disagree with, but I will just tell you that for me going forward, for the city, it's not about, it's exactly the question, going to the question you asked. It's not about tomorrow. It's not about a year from now. It's not 10,000 here or 5,000 here. It's about what you want to achieve in 3, 5, 10 years from now. And how do we get there? Is it making the city bigger? Is there more opportunities there? Is there potential growth factors that are included? Are there potential innovative programs that we elect to go after? But it really comes down to one thing, is where do you, the council, want your staff to spend its time? Do you want to spend your time being future focused, or do we spend time with other things that deal with more of the today? And we have to do that every day. There are core services that we provide, you all know, that we can't get around, right? Whether it's HR related issues, payroll related issues, the list goes on and on, IT, those core services that we do. We don't really have a choice, but we really need to be future focused as we make some course corrections here with addressing the structural deficit. It's about giving us direction. Hey, find that solution, find that sort of magic pill, you know, a handful of beans or whatever it may be that is off into the future. And that in 3, 5, 10 years now, we look back and say, hey, you know, we put the right navigation coordinates into our system and look at where it's brought us. So yes, to your question, where do we go and what does that look in 3 or 5 years? I can't tell you what it's going to look like, but it'll look a heck of a lot better if we focus on what we can achieve in the future and what we want to be as a city and keep us, my ask, keep your staff here, especially your executive, all your staff for that matter. Keep them here, not here. Push us to be here and to work with you on those sort of legacy solutions at the end of the day. The city has a great track record of doing some of that. But if we're going to do that and really make an impact, now's the time. It starts today, not yesterday. And we're not worried about yesterday. It is what it is. But it really starts today. So that would be my answer to your question. Sorry for the long answer, Mr. Mayor.
No problem.
Through the mayor.
Yes, sir.
I do have a question. Circle back to the healthy cities, 15% required. Projected 25-26 is 7.6. As a percentage, what is that number?
About 12%.
So we're actually, what you're saying is we're actually under the 15%.
Right. And as Councilmember Boomgarden was saying earlier, there are so many ways you can calculate that. Listen, I can probably keep you here till 10 o'clock tonight saying use the GFOA recommendations and not the Healthy City Reserve recommendations. I can tell you, you don't have enough contingencies per policy level. You have reserves, but you don't have appropriate contingencies. So you should take some of that money and put it in contingencies. You don't have reserves for economic uncertainties. You should probably have a category for economic uncertainty. So we can probably discuss that all night on the percentage on the healthy cities, is it? And I think it's good to have that sitting aside, but there are also things that we're not including that we just have that one account, if you will, related to reserves or contingencies. And I think your contingency budget is about 100,000 right now. Usually it's somewhere in the 5% range. So
when you say it's required, that's by the state.
no,
It's by the feds.
no.
It's by whom?
That was as best I can understand, and maybe somebody with some historical perspective can help me out. But the Healthy Cities Reserve, I think that was established through some type of association or what have you. And maybe it was put out to cities saying, hey, this is the methodology for a good reserve. We've done some beta testing with maybe your Moody's, S&P or whatever. At least that's my guess anyway. So it was a standard that was set for cities. That's the best I can tell you, unless anybody's got a.
And bonding agencies are currently looking at this, correct?
They're always looking at what you have in reserves and what you have set aside. Absolutely. For capital projects, I mean, they count it all.
That is, sir.
Through the mayor.
Yes, sir.
Robert, on slide 31, you put something in it stuck out to me that I think you alluded to, of what you just were explaining, what that specific citywide priorities, measurable and actionable and deliverable. I think that's the focus that I think that you just explained to me. Am I off course with this, or is that what you're?
Spot on. You know, and you know, I know people are tired probably hearing this example, and I'm sure council members are too, but when you develop those priorities and specifics, right, we then figure out the right type of prescription to go after it. We know who it's assigned to. We have a general time frame of when it should be accomplished, but it's when you go to that optometrist, right? And it takes some trial and error too to get that right prescription, but you're sitting in front of that big thing that they wheel in front of your face and they start clicking lenses. Is that clear? Is that clear? Is 1, 2, 1, 2, or is it 3 or 4? And they keep doing that with both your eyes, and eventually you get to a clear picture. But it takes a lot of steps to get there. And so going through an exercise where specific priorities are addressed, so your department heads know where the actual focus is. It's not generally stated, but it's more specific. Council member, I think that's what you're talking about. That's the good stuff at the end of the day. You don't want to over metric something when it comes to strategic plans or priority setting, et cetera. But you got to list who's responsible, what the action is, who's responsible, and a rough time frame of when things are going to be completed. To me, that makes things accountable for folks that are doing the work for you as council members, but also it causes celebration as well with your accomplishments. And as you check those things off the list, and as you're doing those quarterly reviews, or even if they're monthly, we can do a review of what those priorities and action items are and say, yeah, city council, this department accomplished 2 of these in the first quarter. In the second quarter, this department accomplished this many in this focus area. But again, it gets back to the specifics. That picture starts becoming clearer and clearer about what our priority accomplishments will allow the city to be in the future.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Mr. Bendorf, I'm just going to go back to some things you made, comments you made just a few minutes ago. First of all, I want to highlight just a couple of things I know that are coming in the budget so that it's not just kind of a theoretical picture of where we're going tonight. We did accept, for the most part, the recommendations from our department heads across the boards with the budgets. We did go through the CIP, which you will see, and dealt with some of that stuff that we've been budgeting for 50 years that never happened. And we don't have the 1 million because we gave it to Sutter County for the library a couple of years ago.
Still collecting the fee.
Are we still collecting it?
It's an impact fee.
Okay, well, we can double check that one to see if we got more money. So, but anyway, that one is, I just happened to think of that. But going through that budget, you know, we've already looked at all that and you'll see that stuff coming forward. But the biggest thing that sticks with me, Robert, what you've told me and our discussions over the past couple of months and with the ad hoc committee is we got to get this right. And I go back to the trust and the collaborative effort. And you just hit on the staff time. Everything that we do as council members involves staff time. Everything we do. And so not that we want to be derelict in our duties, but I guarantee you every member of the community does not have the in-depth knowledge of what's going on in the city as the five of us do up here, or what all of our team has out there. And there's a time and place for everything. And so let's just be careful with what someone else's perceived priority is that we pick up and carry, because it may not be the right appropriate time. This is more about stabilizing our team, stabilizing our future, and getting the budget right. There's a ton of things I would love for us to do that before I leave office. But at the same time, if we don't stabilize this ship and deal with this budget crisis, it's all immaterial. So to me, that becomes job one right now. Everything else is secondary. So I would ask that the council come together on that, and I'm sure we will. It's just, I just wanted to say that's what came out of a lot of in that ad hoc meeting. This is what we've got to do.
Thank you, Mayor Shaw. And I please don't take my comments as, you know, hey, we're only going to do what's related to this budget and what they put in there. We know that there's things come up, things that come up on a daily basis that become a priority. We get that.
Mm-hmm.
Work in public sector long enough, you realize that, hey, something's all of a sudden coming out of left field or right field. They're introducing thousands upon thousands of pieces of legislation every year about 45 miles to the south of us. If you think none of them have an impact to the city, well, obviously wrong, right? But we have to adjust to those. And so that's some of that ongoing work too. But I think your staff is great staff and they have their finger on the pulse. But I think in solving some of these problems going forward, it's going to take a collaborative approach, not only a collaborative approach with your executive team, but also that collaborative approach between that executive team and your council to say, hey, where do you want us to be? That's a question we should always be asking each other, is where should we be in 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years from now? And is this going to move the needle or not? So, and I've only had a limited time to work with your council and the staff, but I am so impressed at their level of sophistication and what they accomplish on some really shoestring budgets. And your council, I know, is proud, and you should be, but it's a joy to work with them every day. There are some creative, very dedicated, loyal folks. So.
Well, thank you. We need to provide you some direction tonight if there's no more comments. Is there anything that the council has heartburn with or anything as far as the guidelines and the acknowledgements that our city manager and our finance director need to take under advisement for a different approach? They're going to be getting us numbers. I see their numbers are coming, but is there anything up there that you disagreed with thus far in their approach to this? Because they're probably, I would say, 99% down that avenue. And we wanted to have tonight's meeting to see, oh, we don't want to use one-time money, so go back to the drawing board, or we don't want to do A, B, or C, so that they could make that final adjustment before we got here on the 17th. So is the entire council straw poll nods? We good with?
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
To the mayor. So with the going back to the healthy cities, so what you're saying is there's wiggle room in there. Okay, I'm getting a nod. Is that right, Robert?
Just define wiggle.
Okay.
So Councilmember, yes, I think there's probably some wiggle room, but again, it's to what extent do you want to paint a picture of where we have money put aside for those types of
Right.
things? Do you want an emergency reserve fund? Do you want a healthy cities fund? Do you want a higher contingency for those fluctuations that occur during the course of a year? Because we're seeing cost increases coming out of nowhere.
Right.
And necessarily you don't set up a reserve for that, but you have a contingency, which our contingency is only $100,000, really doesn't allow for much.
Right.
So again, yes, certainly there's some room to move there, but putting it into the right pots certainly should be considered as well.
Thank you.
So we all good with the theory? All good? So Mr. Bendorf, I think you've got the all nods. Deanna, all nods, continue and finish up what we've been working on thus far. Is there any more comments from the council or questions? Okay. On behalf of the entire city council, I know myself and Councilmember Pasquale personally, because we were the ad hoc. Deanna, thank you. To all the department heads, thank you. We came into those meetings this year and we heard directly from you guys, and it was quite a bit of a different discussion, if you all remember. And I just want to say thank you for all the work that you've done. And I hope you understand the trust that we are placing in you. And we are a team and we will get together with this. So Mr. Bendorf, Deanna, if there's anything that you need from us, please let us know. Is there anything tonight that you know of? Okay. So from here, we will be getting summaries of the budget, and that'll be out before our meeting that we have. And we are anticipating this coming back on the 17th, correct? Okay. So, all right. Any question from the council?
Just thanks for bringing that shovel.
All right. Well, if there is no other business to come before us tonight, and hearing and seeing none, we will adjourn.
Yuba-Sutter.live's local government live streams are presented by Plumas Lake Self-Storage in Plumas Lake, where lifelong local residents are helping other residents keep things safe, providing indoor storage units, outdoor RV and vehicle parking, moving supplies, and Penske truck rentals. Details at plumaslakeselfstorage.com.
Yuba-Sutter done live. It's the truth that comes through.